Hello, Colby Matthews here, your rambling host of Peregrine Prude. Welcome back to episode 3. I'm really excited about today's book that we're going to be diving into. It is C.S. Lewis, The Four Loves. The Four Loves by C.S. Lewis. And of course, I'm sure you've heard of C.S. Lewis before. He's a very prolific writer in the 20th century, one of the leading Christian thinkers, apologists that from the 20th century. He wrote such popular books as the Screwtape Letters and the Chronicles of Narnia, among many more. And I believe that The Four Loves is definitely a classic of his, perhaps not quite as well known as some others. His full name, which is interesting, the CS stands for Clive Staples Lewis. So Staples is an interesting middle name, but I like it. I want to say that I want to thank my new subscribers and people that have just checked out the videos. I appreciate that. I hope that you are enjoying, maybe getting some insights about these books. Maybe these videos are prodding you to go buy the books yourselves and read the whole thing. I hope that this channel has that effect for some people. I want to note that I came across this book when I was in my mid-20s, and it was during a period of serious heartbreak for myself. And during that heartbreak, I realized that I didn't really have a good grasp on what love, like Christian true love, really was. I never had really dug into it or thought about it extensively before. And so in that time of heartbreak, I realized that I needed to study the different aspects and of love so that I could apply it better in the future. And this is one of the books that aided me tremendously in that search, in that effort for a better sense of love and how to apply it. And later on, whenever I would meet the most beautiful, gorgeous, inside and out woman in South Korea, whenever I met her and we started dating, what I had learned by looking into love more deeply during that time of heartbreak, it allowed me to enter that relationship with her in a better place and from a better perspective, so that I could apply love more accurately and just better with regard to biblical standard of love. So I'd like to point out before I get into this that love is one of those things, along with reason and rationality and logic and just people's motivation for doing pretty much anything. But love is definitely one of those things that it depends on your philosophical presuppositions. It depends on the foundations of your thinking, what you believe about human nature, what you believe about the purpose of existence. Your love branches directly off of what you think about those things. And that's why we often get two different, different groups of people or different individuals who fight, but from their perspectives, from where they began presuppositionally, they are actually loving, but they're loving in opposite directions. I mean, here's an example. Take Adolf Hitler, right? From his evil philosophical presuppositions, trying to defend the so-called Aryan race, Germanic Aryan race, and eradicate this earth from what he believed to be lesser kinds of people. He was doing that with from a rationally consistent sense of love to preserve the race that he thought should be preserved for the betterment of humanity based upon where he was coming from. Now, his presuppositions were totally wrong, and therefore the rational outflowings of the way he went about love were also totally wrong. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. Love depends on where you start on the deeper levels of belief about human nature and belief about the purpose of existence. And a lot of people now, they probably don't think there is a fundamental objective purpose to existence. And therefore, love has also, the way they love also reflects that. It is purposeless. It's all about feeling good, emotionally feeling good. And once that good emotional feeling is gone, well, then so is their love, because there's no purpose to it. There's no purpose other than just self-satisfaction. I'm going to read you the synopsis from the back cover of the book before we get into it. In this candid, wise, and warmly personal book, C.S. Lewis gently reflects on the 4 basic kinds of human love: affection, friendship, erotic love, and charity. He explores the promise and the perils of love between parents and children, love men share with other men, and women with other women, love shared between men and women, and the love of and for God that deepens all love. Lewis also considers the question of sex, possessiveness, jealousy, pride, false sentimentality, good and bad manners in loving, and the need for more laughter between lovers. There are risks that accompany the rewards of love, the author cautions, but he recommends taking them, since the only place outside heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all dangers and perturbations of love is hell. I'm going to read that again because that is really worth considering. The only place outside heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell. Right? Very good. All right, so it mentions that he tackles the 4 aspects of love, which are affection, friendship, erotic love, and charity. And he breaks this book up into, 6 chapters, basically. There's the introduction, and then there's also this one chapter after the intro. It's called Likings and Loves for the Subhuman. So this is kind of like an area where a lot of people, they talk about, oh, I love cheeseburgers, I love dogs, right? It's not, we use the word love, but it's not really love in the real sense. It's more of a liking or an appreciation for something. And so I'm very grateful that he tackles this, and he makes a distinction that it is not really a part of the 4 main true loves. So you got the intro, you got the likings and loves for the subhuman, and then the last 4 chapters are each dedicated to one of the 4 loves: affection, friendship, eros, which is erotic love, and charity. All right, let's get cracking. I'm not going to tackle this whole book in this episode. This is going to be probably at least, I'm probably going to make this a 3-part episode to tackle the 4 loves. The first, quote, "The first distinction I made was therefore between what I called gift love and need love. Now, this is an important distinction, and I bring this quote up because we'll see this later on in the book within other quotes. He references this distinction between gift love and need love. We are born helpless. As soon as we are fully conscious, we discover loneliness. We need others physically, emotionally, intellectually. We need them if we are to know anything, even ourselves, right? Other people are truer than a mirror. You see yourself in the way other people take you and perceive you and react to you more than you would if you are just simply trying to analyze yourself. They are the mirror to yourself. I still think that if all we mean by our love is a craving to be loved, we are in a very deplorable state. Absolutely. Because love is actually, it's action, right? Love is action, and it's an overflowing of the self into other things, into other people. Where need love is felt, there may be reasons for denying or totally mortifying it, but not to feel it is, in general, the mark of the cold egoist. The cold egoist, that's what we might call a sociopath these days. Since we do, in reality, need one another. It is not good for man to be alone. Then, the failure of this need to appear as need love is in consciousness. In other words, the illusory feeling that it is good for us to be alone is a bad spiritual symptom. Just as lack of appetite is a bad medical symptom because men do really need food. On the spectrum of introversion and extroversion, I definitely lean towards an introvert. I'm not way on the spectrum, really far down on the spectrum of introversion, but I'm definitely on that end. I enjoy being alone. I recharge emotionally and psychically whenever I'm alone. Now that's not to say I don't enjoy being with people and spending time with people and making merry with people. I definitely enjoy that, but I'm drained. I'm slowly drained whenever I'm around other people, and then I recharge whenever I'm alone. So it's not bad to be alone, but we need to make sure that it's intermittent, that we don't want to be alone for too long or all the time, because that is, as he says, that is it's a bad spiritual symptom if we want to be alone too long. This he says as a lack of appetite is a bad medical symptom. Here's a little aside. I heard on the news that there was a study done that the less people eat, the longer they live. Now, of course, that makes sense to some degree, right? If you eat too much, you're gonna most likely be overweight, and then that leads to a shorter lifespan overall. But of course, if you take that to the logical conclusion on the other end of it, if you never eat, then you would live forever. But of course, that's ridiculous, right? But if you apply the logic of people who tend to eat lesser live longer, well then, if you eat nothing, you'll live forever. That's not true. So that's something I thought of whenever I heard that statistic, that scientific discovery. A man's spiritual health is exactly proportional to his love for God. That is good. That is very right. We're in the introduction now, by the way. It's usually where I start. Man approaches God most nearly when he is in one sense least like God. For what can be more unlike than fullness and need? sovereignty and humility, righteousness and penitence, limitless power and a cry for help. This paradox staggered me when I first ran into it. It also wrecked all my previous attempts to write about love. When we face it, something like this seems to result. That right? You think this kind of has the idea behind it that whenever we are weak, whenever we are most weak and most dependent, we are actually at our strongest point because we are totally relying upon God and not our own strength or our own devices or our own cleverness. So I get it. Yeah, it is a paradox, and I love a good paradox, right? A paradox is not a contradiction. A paradox is two truths that exist simultaneously, but they don't seem to be able to exist simultaneously at first glance. And this is a beautiful paradox. When I read this, it kind of reminded me of a distinction that a former deacon at my church used to make. He was a mentor of mine, a spiritual mentor of mine. And this was back when I was in high school. The WWJD bracelets were really popular, the What Would Jesus Do bracelets. And while I'm not against that, I think that's a good thing to ask yourself on most occasions in life. What would Jesus do here? But I don't think that's the best question to ask yourself. And this spiritual mentor of mine pointed this out, and I was like, yeah, it's a good point, spiritual mentor. And he said we shouldn't ask ourselves what would Jesus do necessarily. We should ask ourselves, what would Jesus have me do? Because what Jesus would do, he was God, right? He was God. He's God. What he can do and would do and will do is not necessarily what he would have me do. And so that's a subtle but yet I think important distinction. But of course, WWJHMD, what would Jesus have me do, doesn't have a nice ring to it and doesn't fit so cleanly on a bracelet or a t-shirt. It's like, what does WWJHMD mean? So, but all right. Our model is the Jesus, not only of Calvary, but of the workshop, the roads, the crowds, the clamorous demands and surly oppositions, the lack of all peace and privacy, the interruptions. For this, so strangely unlike anything we can attribute to the divine life in itself, is apparently not only like, but is the divine life operating under human conditions. I think that's very important that we see that God, that Jesus in the flesh, in the hypostatic union, the union of 100% God and 100% man, hypostatically united in this one being, Jesus, that he lived the life that we all live, in a sense, for approximately 33 years. He waited in lines, in queues. He was no doubt annoyed. Did his annoyance lead him to sin? No. He dealt with the political Roman oppression of his country, and he no doubt witnessed massive abuses to his people by the Romans. He dealt with all these things, and given the time that he lived in, he probably experienced a lot more of this lack of peace and privacy than in his life on earth than we can even really imagine. The truth that God is love may slyly come to mean for us the converse, that love is God. This is an important point, right? I think I've said this in some other videos, that God is love. Love is not God. We can't make the quality, the aspect of love. We have to always consider love in the within the anthology of all of God's other aspects, such as grace, mercy, wrath, justice, holiness, all of them. That's not all of them, but that's some of them. We may give our human loves the unconditional allegiance which we owe only to God. Then they become gods. Then they become demons. Then they will destroy us and also destroy themselves. For natural loves that are allowed to become gods do not remain loves. They are still called so, but can become, in fact, complicated forms of hatred. Wow, that's right. If our love for humans, sorry, I'm logging back into my computer because I got to reference something that's on the computer here in just a little bit, I think. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to that point, but I'm going to have it ready just in case. If we love somebody else or something else more than God, that love no longer becomes a love. It becomes an idol, right? It becomes a demon for us, and it becomes a complicated form of hatred. Now we're going to look into chapter 2, where he tackles likings and loves for the subhuman, right? Things that we love or we like that not applied to humans or nor to God. And here he makes two important distinctions between need pleasures and pleasures of appreciation. I wrote an article in an English, widely published English magazine in Korea, and it was about my thoughts and reflections about eating dog soup. I ate dog soup one time whenever I was in South Korea. I gotta say, it was pretty doggone good. Wasn't too rough on the stomach. Anyways, I had considered eating dog soup for several years while I was in Korea before I actually did it. But it took me a while to do it because I love dogs as pets. I love dogs as pets. I've had many dogs growing up. We have a dog in the yard now. And I just kept imagining the bowl of dog soup put in front of me and not being able to actually go through with eating it because I could not get images of pet dogs out of my head. However, upon further consideration, I got thinking, do I really love dogs? And this is kind of part of my reflections in the article I wrote. The article, by the way, was called Dog Soup for the Soul. And I asked myself, do I really love dogs, or do I just like dogs? Do I have a healthy appreciation for dogs? And I realized that that's really all it is. It's a healthy appreciation for canines. And I like them, but I don't really love them. I don't. I wouldn't lay my life down for a dog. I wouldn't live for a dog. If it came to it, if we were me and my family were in such a situation that there was absolutely nothing else to eat, and we were starving, but yet we had our dog, well, we're gonna have Cheerio brisket for dinner. Cheerio is the name of my dog. Hope it doesn't come to that, but yeah, so I don't really love dogs, right? Given those considerations. So for those reasons, I appreciate dogs as pets. I have a healthy appreciation for dogs as pets, and also now I have a healthy appreciation for dog meat in soup. I mean, because they are just animals. They're animals that my favorite animal, but at the end of the day, they are just animals that could be a justifiable food source for us. But the most innocent and necessary of need pleasures. Wait a minute. But the most innocent and necessary of need pleasures have about them something of the same character. Only something, of course. They are not hated once we have had them, but they certainly die on us with extraordinarily abruptness and completely. The scullery tap and the tumbler are very attractive indeed when we come in parched from mowing the grass. 6 seconds later, they are emptied of all interest. The smell of frying food is very different before and after breakfast. And if you will forgive me for citing the most extreme instance of all, have there not for most of us been moments in a strange town when the sight of the word gentleman over a door has roused a joy almost worthy of celebration in verse? Right, talking about you need to go to the bathroom, and then you see the bathroom and you're very relieved that one is near. Pleasures of appreciation are very different. They make us feel that something, I'm not going to go there yet. This part I just read about need pleasures, right? Needing to go to the bathroom, needing to eat breakfast, needing to quench your thirst after hard work in the sun. I think that this is dealing with something I learned in undergrad that they called the law of diminishing return. And so it's like the idea that, like, sometimes Arby's, at least back in the day, they had this like 5 for $5 deal, or 3 for, I don't know, like you got 5 roast beef Arby's roast beef sandwiches for $5. Now, when you're hungry, that's a good deal, right? It's like you go, or you want to feed, you want to share with your family or something. Sometimes you might want to do that. You go, you spend $5, you get 5 roast beef sandwiches, and you're so hungry, you eat one. Oh, so satiated, so satisfying. You eat, you're still hungry. You eat the second one, but then once you start biting into that third one, the how did he put it here? The pleasures of that need, it dies on us with extraordinary abruptness, and then eventually completely. So in that third one, you're kind of struggling to get that third one down, though you can probably handle it, and then you're probably not going to eat the fourth or fifth one. I mean, it depends on who you are, but at least certainly I would not be eating the fourth or fifth one. I'd be packing that up for another day. So that's the law of diminishing return, that your joy of consuming something diminishes as your need for it diminishes. So that was kind of the idea behind need pleasures. And then here we're going into pleasures of appreciation. Pleasures of appreciation are very different. They make us feel that something has not merely gratified our senses, in fact, but claimed our appreciation by right. The connoisseur does not merely enjoy his claret as he might enjoy warming his feet when they were cold. He feels that there is a wine that deserves his full attention, that justifies all the tradition and skill that have gone to its making, and all the years of training that have made it his own, and that have made his own palate fit to judge it. There is even a glimmering of unselfishness in this attitude. He wants the wine to be preserved and kept in good condition, not entirely for his own sake. Right? We can all relate to this. We admire something, like some people admire sports like NFL football. People love NFL football, and it's not a selfish thing that they want football to exist merely for their own pleasure. They respect the game, and they want that tradition and the of the game to continue into perpetuity. Some people they love firearms, and they want that to they don't necessarily love it for their own enjoyment of having them and shooting them and all those aspects, but they just love they appreciate it. They have a healthy appreciation for the thing in and of itself. But where need love is left unaided, we can hardly expect it not to die on us once the need is no more. That is why the world rings with the complaints of mothers whose grown-up children neglect them, and of forsaken mistresses whose lovers' love was pure need, which they have satisfied. Right? I'm very thankful that even though my mom loves me dearly, that she had the wisdom to let me go especially whenever I went to South Korea for 7 years. She realized that it was more important for me to be where God wanted me to be than for me to be where she wanted me to be. And that is a very important distinction. Now, whenever you love somebody, that you have to let them go. Sometimes that means letting them go to make their own mistakes, to be in a place where you know full well God doesn't want them to be there, but yet you have to trust that God in His timing will bring them back, or in His will possibly will not bring them back. Need love cries to God from our poverty. Gift love longs to serve or even to suffer for God. Appreciative love says, "We give thanks to Thee for Thy great glory." Need love says of a woman, "I cannot live without her." Gift love longs to give her happiness, comfort, protection, if possible, wealth. Appreciative love gazes and holds its breath and is silent, rejoices that such a wonder should exist, even if not for him. Will not be wholly dejected by losing her, would rather have it so than never to have seen her at all. I often joke that my wife is Wonder Woman, because man, sometimes she really makes me wonder. And she always loves it when I tell her that. And I'm sure she'll appreciate it even more now that I've done it here. Nothing about us except our neediness in this life, I can't read today. Nothing about us except our neediness is, in this life, permanent. Think about that. Let that sink in. Nothing about us except our neediness is, in this present life on earth, permanent. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing about God is permanent. That's about nothing about us is permanent on this while living on this earth, in this present form, unglorified state. Nothing is permanent except for our neediness. If you take nature as a teacher, she will teach you exactly the lessons you had already decided to learn. This is only another way of saying that nature does not teach. Yeah. Because everybody starts out with their beliefs, what they believe to be true, already firmly established. Even if you are a complete empiricist and you don't believe in anything that has not been empirically proven, scientifically proven, well, you still make a plethora of philosophical assumptions and belief assumptions. And I think one way to think about this is that whatever information we take in, we either reject it because it does not fit into our worldview, or we incorporate it to fit into our worldview. People do not change their fundamental worldviews merely by information coming in naturally. That happens, that is a spiritual process. A person doesn't fundamentally change what they believe about human nature, what they believe about the purpose of existence. That can't happen by relying upon nature as your teacher. That can only happen if you either believe in you start believing in the spiritual, whereas before you did not, or you believed in the spiritual, or at least you thought you did, and then you stop. Right? It's a spiritual shift. It's not a natural shift. It's always spiritual, but it can go one way or the other. It can go from low to high, or high to low. The word tree hugger has been thrown around a lot, and there's nothing really necessarily wrong with tree hugging. The problem is that most tree huggers don't stop at tree hugging. They kind of go the full way, and they might better be labeled a tree philanderer. Not a tree hugger, but a tree philanderer. Metaphorically speaking, of course. But they love trees and they love nature so much that they want to basically, they would make love to. Their love is so kind of intense that they would make love to the tree. They wouldn't stop at hugging. What nature lovers, now I love nature, don't get me wrong, I love nature. I'm not as much of an outdoorsman as I would like, but I'm a novice outdoorsman. I love hiking, camping, I love being out there. What nature lovers, whether they are Wordsworthians or people with dark gods in their blood, get from nature is an iconography, a language of images that I would argue point to the existence and also aspects and the nature of God. I do not mean simply visual images. It is the moods or spirits themselves, the powerful expositions of terror, gloom, jocundity, cruelty, lust, innocence, purity, that are the images. In them, each man can clothe his own belief. We must learn our theology or philosophy elsewhere. Not surprisingly, we often learn them from theologians and philosophers. Nature cannot satisfy the desires she arouses, nor answer theological questions, nor sanctify us. Our real journey to God involves constantly turning our backs on her, nature, passing from the dawn-lit fields into some poky little church. But the love of her has been a valuable and, for some people, an indispensable initiation. Right? Nature should point to God. If we see nature through the right eyes, she should point us to God. If we appreciate nature purely in and of herself, and like she is her, nature is an end in and of herself, then we arrive at where we are at with the fanaticism of the nature lovers, the people who are trying to hurt humans, which are trying to hurt humans for the sake of preserving nature. Now we should take pains to preserve nature for future generations. I'm not against that at all. That's very commendable and admirable. But we have to hold those in balance. And sometimes the people who value nature as an end in and of herself, they tip the scales too far on the benefit towards nature, and not for man, not for humans. Right? It's kind of an indication, I think, of the downfall of society, the degradation of society, whenever animals are held in higher regard than humans. A lot of people, they are choosing to be a dog parent, a cat parent, right? What is that? I understand, but you're not a parent, right? Unless you have kids too. I was at a Zoom meeting with a coworker, and I was trying to figure out if this new job that was coming up within the office would be a fit for me. You know, having a son, having a wife. I don't really want to work in the evenings or on the weekends. I like just a normal first shift Monday through Friday thing, so I can spend my time, as much time with them as possible. So I was trying to get a feel for this new position. I knew that it would require some afternoons and weekend work. I was trying to get a feel for how much, and it turns out that it was going to be way more than what I was willing to do. And the person I was talking to about it, she said that, yeah, I feel you. Like, I've got these dogs here, and this job takes me away from them, and it's really hard. I was like, and I understand that, but it's like, and she was saying that to try to build a connection, some sympathy with me, but at the same time I realized that there's no comparison. There's no comparison between being a parent to a human child and being the owner, the caretaker of dogs, right? It's not on the same level. That's the closest thing she had, because she doesn't have any children. So I understand that that's the closest thing that she had to compare it to. So that's what she did compare it to. But yeah, it was almost, I was getting a sense that she was trying to make it almost the same level of things. And yeah, I it's like, I didn't say anything, but in the back of my mind I was like, yeah, not the same. Nature dies on those who try to live for a love of nature. We private persons should keep a wary eye on the health or disease of our own love for our country. Here he's kind of starting to dive into the appreciation and the love for one's country, like patriotism. It's very important that I think it's very important that we love our country, but there is an extremism there, right? That could potentially be unhealthy. And to be honest, probably a lot of you will not agree with me on this, but here lately, the past few years, I have felt a conviction about saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I stand for it. I look at the flag, but I will not recite the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. I don't love my country any less. I consider myself a patriot for the USA. I would fight and die for my country to protect it. I would do that. But at the same time, I had this conviction about saying the Pledge of Allegiance, because there may come a day where I don't hold myself in allegiance to the country anymore. It may devolve so much to where I can no longer, in good conscience, be faithful to defending it. It's not to that point now, but I just feel like the wording to the Pledge of Allegiance is reserved. That kind of pledge is reserved for God. That kind of all-in attitude. I would say a pledge to God with that kind of wording, but I would not pledge to. I don't think it's not right for me to pledge allegiance to the USA. Now I understand that it has that phrase "under God" in it. To the country to the flag for the country for which it stands, one nation under God, right? So I guess you could make the argument that as long as we are in fact under God, then that makes it right to pledge allegiance to the flag and to the country for which it stands. Nevertheless, it smacks of idolatry to me. You're pledging yourself, you're not really pledging yourself to the country, you're pledging yourself to the flag, which symbolizes the country. And while I greatly admire the flag, I had the flag flying in my front yard. I admire it for what it stands for all the people that have bled and died defending it. I have great admiration for all of that, but yet to have such an all-in pledge to an object that symbolizes a nation that may or may not stay faithful to God, I can't in good conscience do that anymore. Chesterton says, "A man's reasons for not wanting his country to be ruled by foreigners are very like his reasons for not wanting his house to be burned down, because he could not even begin to enumerate all the things he would miss." There's Chesterton again. And it was actually through by reading C.S. Lewis and his many references to G.K. Chesterton that I found Chesterton, who's now my favorite author, and C.S. Lewis is a close second in my book. But and I later found out by reading some I think it was a biography about Lewis, that he was greatly influenced by reading G.K. Chesterton, and that Chesterton's writings had a big influence on him actually coming to Christ out of atheism. I read elsewhere that Lewis, he fought in World War I, in the trenches of World War I, and that whenever he was an atheist for most of his young life, into his young adulthood. I'm not sure exactly how old he was when he was saved, but he said that whenever he was in the trenches of World War I, he was very self-proud, very proud of himself, that during the hell that was, and the fear that imbued every fiber of his being during that time, he never once gave in to the temptation of praying to God. He was such a diehard atheist that he refused to give into that instinct to pray to God whenever his life was in mortal danger. And then he recounted that in I think in one of his other books, I don't know where, and how foolish that was, but that he was referencing that as prayer is an instinct in certain situations. It's like we reach out for the divine. It's an instinct that we have built in us that we should not deny. The last thing we want is to make everywhere else just like our own. The last thing we want is to make everywhere else just like our own home. It would not be home unless it were different, right? And this is kind of an argument against globalism. I mean, I'm not against globalism necessarily, aspects of it, but we don't want everywhere to be the same, right? God doesn't want everywhere to be the same. I think one of the reasons why God, after the flood, that He instructed people to go and scatter, go scatter across the earth, was because He did not want everybody to be the same. He did not want uniformity. God is a God of diversity within obedience to Him, of course, but God wants diversity. He wants plurality among people within obedience to Him. And kind of going back to that, we don't want foreigners to invade our country, because we can't begin to enumerate all the things that we would miss. Now, it's not anti-foreign, but what he's saying is a foreign army invading, right? I don't think it's talking about having foreign elements come into our country and assimilate into our society. He's not talking about that, but he's talking about having foreign elements taking over and molding our country completely. And that is kind of a valid aspect of kind of what's happening now, right? We don't want, it's kind of a soft invasion in a sense. Now, countries, societies, they change over time, and there's nothing wrong with changing over time. It depends on what the changes are, of course, but we kind of see a soft revolution happening, and it's almost as if the foreigners in our country are the natives, right? The people, it is Americans who have become foreign. They are no longer recognizable as Americans. They have adopted foreign gods, to use the terminology in the Old Testament. We have adopted foreign gods. When the natural loves become lawless, they do not merely do harm to the others, they themselves cease to be the loves they were, to be loves at all. Right? You can't have... Okay, let me rephrase. Every work of art has to have a border. Right? The work of art is defined by its border. A masterpiece painting, it is defined, it is contained. Its beauty is defined because it's in a frame, because it has an edge. A sculpture is beautiful because it is contained, it is defined by the beautiful lines, the three-dimensional lines that make it up, right? And in the same way, the art of loving is made beautiful, is made significant, is made meaningful by being by operating within the confines of God's law, by being subject to obedience to God. Love is what we need to do. But how do we know what love is unless we read the love letter that is God's Word? God's Word is how we know what love is, how we know how we should operate and love in different scenarios and situations towards different people. That is how we know what love is, by studying God's Word. We know that the two greatest commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. And I like how Chesterton, in one of his writings, he says that we are we are commanded to, in the second commandment, we are commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves, and then we're also commanded to love our enemies. And in Chesterton's pithiness, he says, I think these, he says he thinks these two kind of go together, loving your enemies and also your neighbor as yourself, because often our neighbors are our enemies. They're often one and the same. I mean, we have all got stories about how, like neighborly rivalries. Think like, Dennis the Menace and Mr. Wilson, that kind of dynamic, or even within families. A lot of times, family members, they don't necessarily like each other, right? But we need to love them. And he will go into this later in the book about affection, which is one of the 4 loves that he talks about. And affection is found primarily within the family, and it's a deeper love that exists that actually transcends liking. Okay, I'm going to stop there for today. I'm going to turn this into a 3-parter. So today I tackled the introduction and the love and liking for the subhuman. And next time on part 2, I will deal with the first 2 loves, and then on part 3, I will deal with the second 2 loves. I hope that you enjoyed this episode where we started to look into the 4 loves by C.S. Lewis. And if you continue to watch this and you enjoy this content, please feel free to subscribe if that's something that you do, and let others know that this is out here. So I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks again. Peregrine Prude, out.